You already understand more about human psychology than you realize. You just don't know how to spot the dark behavioral patterns yet. Because every person reveals secrets unconsciously, and Carl Jung's 12 dark psychology patterns will show you how to decode them and what they reveal. This is the ability no one teaches you, but once you learn it, you can't unlearn it. But this video isn't a simple list or basic overview. It's a comprehensive breakdown separated into 3 powerful sections, each one building on the previous. If you jump ahead or skip one, you'll miss the psychological depth that makes this actually work. So stick with me, because by the end of all 3 sections, you won't just read others. You'll see yourself in ways you never imagined. From childhood, you're conditioned to believe what people present to you. Actions become our language. But Jung cautioned us not to be deceived by surface behaviors, because people don't act from authenticity. They act from protection, from ego, from hidden psychological fears. The exterior of someone's character is not their reality. It's their psychological shield. The person who appears completely composed may be breaking down internally. The one who seems utterly self-assured may be drowning in doubt underneath, praying no one discovers the truth. And what's most misleading about humans is they're completely unaware they're performing. Most people are participants in a psychological drama they never consciously wrote. Their expressions, their responses, their statements, all molded by unconscious patterns that once protected them. And this is why most people aren't concealing things from you. They're concealing them from their own awareness. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But he didn't intend that as mere philosophy. He intended it as a caution to not mistake the psychological facade for the authentic person. Here's the secret no one shares with you. People reveal their unconscious reality constantly, not through their statements, but through the psychological cracks. The instances they become guarded, the way they overreact, the way they rapidly shift behavior when it touches too close to their hidden wounds. And Jung's first dark psychological pattern reveals this. 1. Everyone wears a psychological persona to survive, not because they're fake, but because they're terrified of rejection. To survive society, people create a version of themselves they hope will be accepted. But personas aren't perfect. They slip, and the first sign of unconscious truth is psychological tension. Watch for what makes someone uncomfortable. That's where the real person begins. Here's how to spot persona cracks. Notice when someone's energy suddenly shifts, when their voice changes tone, when they become defensive about seemingly innocent topics. The person who always appears calm might clench their jaw when questioned. The eternally positive individual might show micro-expressions of irritation. These aren't character flaws, they're the unconscious breaking through the conscious performance. 2. What someone criticizes in others reveals their own shadow. This is one of Jung's sharpest insights: shadow projection. When someone constantly attacks arrogance, they're often battling their own ego issues. When someone can't stop pointing out manipulation in others, they're usually hiding manipulative tendencies they haven't faced. We hate in others what we're afraid to acknowledge in ourselves. So when you want to read someone, don't just look at what they admire, look at what they criticize and why. But here's the advanced level. Pay attention to the emotional intensity behind their criticism. Mild annoyance suggests minor shadow material. Rage or disgust indicates major psychological wounds they're projecting. The person who becomes furious about others' selfishness is usually at war with their own selfish impulses. The one who obsesses over others being fake is typically struggling with their own authenticity. 3. Silence reveals more than performance. Jung didn't believe truth came from what people displayed. In fact, he saw most social behavior as unconscious theater, often used to avoid confronting psychological reality. When someone avoids certain topics, when they give rehearsed responses to deep questions, when they deflect with humor, that avoidance is louder than words. A person avoiding psychological vulnerability is revealing everything about what they fear. Watch for the topics they won't engage with, the questions that make them change the subject, the moments when their answers become suddenly vague or general. These silences aren't random, they're psychological protection mechanisms guarding their deepest wounds. 4. Excessive perfectionism is often disguised inadequacy. Be wary of the person who needs everything to be flawless, the one always correcting others, always controlling outcomes. Jung called this compensation, when the unconscious tries to balance what the conscious mind feels it lacks. Sometimes perfectionism becomes a mask for deep feelings of not being good enough. The more rigid the control, the more chaos they're trying to manage internally. Real confidence doesn't need everything to be perfect. Look for the person who can't tolerate mistakes in themselves or others, who needs to be seen as the expert in every conversation, who becomes anxious when things don't go according to plan. Behind the perfectionist exterior often lies a child who was criticized for every flaw, creating an adult who believes love and acceptance depend on flawless performance. Reading people isn't about judging them. It's about understanding their psychological core. When someone interrupts constantly, you now know it's not always aggression. It might be fear of being overlooked. When someone posts obsessively about their success, it may be overcompensation for feeling inadequate. When someone avoids eye contact while saying "I'm fine," you know to listen to the body language, not the words. Use these patterns not to gain power, but to extend understanding. Because the more clearly you see someone's psychology, the less likely you are to take their behavior personally. And that's Jung's secret. He didn't want you to see through others so you could control them. He wanted you to see through them so you could stop being fooled by unconscious patterns and start connecting with what's real beneath the psychological armor. If you've ever looked at someone and felt like you were only seeing the psychological surface, if you've ever wished you could decode what's really going on beneath the persona, you're about to understand something deeper. It's one thing to notice the psychological mask. It's another thing entirely to watch it crack under pressure. Because what Jung discovered is that psychological masks don't just slip randomly, they crack in predictable ways when specific psychological triggers are activated. And if you know what those triggers are, you can read someone's entire psychological blueprint just by watching how they respond to pressure. If you've ever paid attention, you've probably seen it happen. A flash of rage when someone's competence is questioned. The way their tone shifts when the subject gets too personal. The nervous laughter that doesn't match their word. These moments aren't accidents. They're psychological tells. And if you know what to look for, you'll begin to understand that people aren't hard to read. They're just scared to be psychologically seen. In part 1, we explored how people build personas to protect themselves. But here in part 2, we go deeper into the places where those personas begin to break. Because Jung believed that the psychological self is not a stable thing. It's a performance, a stitched-together identity meant to survive the world. And the moment it's threatened, the unconscious truth leaks out. 5. Most reactions are driven by unconscious psychological wounds. Ask yourself this: why does someone over-explain? Why do they dominate a conversation or disappear completely? Why do they say yes when they clearly mean no? Psychological wounding. Fear of abandonment, rejection, humiliation, failure. Jung knew that humans rarely act from pure conscious choice. They react from deep unconscious fears of loss, of status, of love, of psychological safety. So, when you want to read someone, stop focusing on what they say they want. Instead, ask, what psychological wound are they protecting? That's where the truth lives. Watch for disproportionate reactions. The person who explodes over minor criticism likely carries deep wounds around feeling inadequate. The one who becomes silent and withdrawn when challenged might have learned that speaking up leads to punishment. These aren't character defects, they're psychological survival strategies that once kept them safe but now control their behavior unconsciously. 6. When someone judges others constantly, it's psychological projection. The man who mocks emotional people might be terrified of his own feelings. The woman who criticizes others for being too sensitive might be at war with her own vulnerability. Jung said that judgment is almost never about the other person. It's about the psychological material we refuse to own. So when you hear repeated criticisms, don't be distracted by the target. Instead, trace the line back to the speaker. What part of themselves are they trying to disown? Projection isn't just a defense mechanism, it's a psychological confession. If you listen carefully, it tells you exactly where someone's deepest pain lives. The person obsessed with others being weak is usually struggling with their own powerlessness. The one constantly pointing out manipulation is often the most manipulative person in the room, but completely unconscious of it. 7. Overconfidence often masks psychological guilt. There's a type of person you've probably met. The one who seems overly sure of themselves, always in psychological control, always composed. But watch long enough, and you'll see the tension, the way they over-prepare, the defensiveness under pressure. Jung observed this in leaders, teachers, anyone who performs certainty because they're scared of being seen as inadequate. When someone is chronically overconfident, look for the psychological guilt they're trying to bury. Real psychological peace doesn't need to perform. This guilt often comes from actions they regret, parts of themselves they're ashamed of, or versions of themselves they're trying to prove wrong. The louder the confidence, the deeper the unconscious shame they're trying to drown out. True confidence is quiet, comfortable, doesn't need to announce itself or put others down to feel strong. 8. People betray their unconscious through psychological extremes. Someone who constantly says, "I don't care what anyone thinks," likely cares deeply. Someone who claims, "I'm always happy," likely isn't. Psychological extremes are tells. It's the ego trying to drown out unconscious doubt. Jung believed that extremism in any direction is psychological imbalance, not strength. So when someone's statements sound too absolute, don't believe the content. Read the unconscious insecurity underneath. Extremes are psychological volume. The question is, what are they trying to silence? The person who insists they never get jealous probably struggles with envy more than most. The one who claims to always tell the truth often has the most complex relationship with honesty. When someone protests too much about having a particular quality, they're usually trying to convince themselves more than you. You're probably starting to feel it now, the psychological shift. You walk into a room and suddenly the unconscious patterns speak louder than the words. You see someone interrupting constantly and realize they're terrified of being psychologically invisible. You see someone who needs constant validation and sense their deep unconscious wound. You're not reading minds, you're reading the psychological unconscious, and Jung gave you the map. This isn't just about understanding others anymore. You're beginning to see these same patterns operating within your own psychology. And that's when the real transformation begins, when you realize that everything you've learned about reading others is actually teaching you to read yourself. This isn't just a skill, it's a psychological responsibility, because once you learn to see people's unconscious clearly, you can't unsee it. And you'll begin to understand that most people are suffering quietly behind psychological defenses. Reading them is not about gaining leverage. It's about offering psychological understanding. When you see the psychological child behind the critic, the unconscious fear behind the bully, the hidden guilt behind the arrogance, you don't become weaker, you become unshakable. because you're no longer reacting to people's psychological masks. You're responding to their unconscious wounds with wisdom. 9. Control seekers often fear inner psychological chaos. When someone micromanages every detail, when they can't handle change, when they dominate people to feel powerful, it's not because they're psychologically strong. Jung saw this clearly. When the inner psychological world is disordered, the outer world must be managed obsessively. So instead of fearing the controlling person, see them for what they are. Someone terrified that the moment they let go psychologically, everything will fall apart. The need for control often stems from childhood experiences where they felt powerless, perhaps having unpredictable parents, experiencing trauma, or growing up in chaos. Now, as adults, they unconsciously believe that controlling their environment is the only way to feel safe. The tighter their grip, the more terrified they are underneath. 10. Psychological performance often masks inner emptiness. This is one of Jung's most relevant insights today. The endless look-at-me energy, the perfect image curation, the constant updates about success. Jung didn't see this as psychological strength. He saw it as unconscious desperation. When someone is constantly performing psychologically, it's because they don't believe they'll be seen or loved without the show. So they create psychological noise, drama, image management. But the person who truly knows themselves psychologically doesn't need to be constantly watched. Look for the person whose self-worth depends entirely on external validation. Who needs likes, comments, attention to feel valuable? Who creates drama when things get too quiet? Behind the performance is often a deep fear of being ordinary, of being forgotten, of discovering they might not be as special as they need to believe. 11. How someone treats psychological weakness reveals their character. Want to truly see someone's psychological makeup? Don't watch how they treat powerful people. Watch how they treat someone who can't fight back psychologically. Jung believed that real psychological strength isn't proven through domination. It's revealed through restraint. If someone mocks vulnerability, they're afraid of their own. If someone punishes psychological mistakes, they likely weren't allowed to make any. The person who can witness weakness without judgment has won their inner psychological war. This pattern reveals everything about someone's relationship with their own vulnerability. The person who's cruel to weakness is usually terrified of their own fragility. The one who shows compassion has made peace with their own imperfections and can therefore accept others. 12. People's psychological patterns are unconscious confessions. This is the final pattern, and it changes everything. People don't always know how to express what psychologically hurts them, but they will show you again and again through unconscious patterns. A person who disappears when things get emotionally close. A person who overworks to avoid psychological stillness. A person who creates drama but never deep connection. These aren't random behaviors, they're psychological confessions. They're saying, "This is how I protect myself psychologically." They're saying, "This is where I was wounded." Jung believed that if you learn to listen to unconscious patterns, not just conscious words, you can hear psychological truth before it's spoken. Every repetitive behavior is a story. The person who always arrives late is often saying, "I'm afraid of commitment." The one who never asks for help is saying, "I learned that needing others means I'm weak." The individual who changes the subject when things get deep is saying, "Intimacy feels dangerous." These patterns aren't personality traits, they're unconscious survival strategies that reveal exactly where someone learned to protect themselves. And when you do understand these patterns, something amazing happens psychologically. You stop personalizing other people's unconscious behavior. You stop judging their psychological defenses. You start understanding their unconscious wounds. You become a psychological mirror, not a weapon. You become someone who sees the unconscious clearly and still chooses compassion. And that, more than any psychological tactic or trick, is what makes you truly powerful. You're not just reading people's psychology. You're remembering your own unconscious patterns. Now take a moment and reflect. Every pattern we covered wasn't just about other people's psychology. It was about your own unconscious, your own psychological defenses, your own childhood programming. Because the more clearly you see others' unconscious patterns, the more clearly you see your own. The person who triggers you the most is often reflecting your own disowned psychological material. The behavior that annoys you in others might be something you do unconsciously. The qualities you admire in someone else are often strengths you haven't yet developed in yourself. This isn't coincidence, it's Jung's law of psychological attraction and repulsion. This isn't the end of psychological understanding. It's the beginning of a new way of seeing the unconscious. Jung didn't just want us to observe psychological patterns. He wanted us to awaken to our own unconscious, to know that everything we judge in others psychologically is something we carry unconsciously, that everything we admire is something we long to embody. Every interaction you have from now on will be different. You'll notice when someone's persona is slipping. You'll see their unconscious projections. You'll recognize when their psychological wounds are triggered. You'll spot their unconscious confessions through repetitive patterns. And gradually, you'll begin to see these same patterns operating within your own psychology. But here's Jung's ultimate insight. The goal isn't to become a psychological manipulator who uses these patterns to control others. The goal is to become psychologically conscious, to see these patterns in others, yes, but also to recognize them operating within yourself. Because the person who truly masters psychology isn't the one who can read everyone else, it's the one who can read themselves. So if you felt psychologically seen by this video, if you've recognized unconscious patterns in people or in yourself, don't keep it to yourself. Comment below which of these 12 patterns hit you the hardest psychologically. Let's build something honest together in a world full of psychological masks. And if this spoke to your unconscious, subscribe. This is just the beginning of learning to see what's psychologically hidden and becoming who you really are.